So in thinking about how did Indian indenture take place, that people came from India to labor in KwaZulu-Natal. And one of the main things to take into consideration first is that indenture came in the aftermath of the abolition of slavery. And so the British Empire needed cheap labor. The Zulu kingdom had not been defeated. They had a sustainable economy, so they didn't need to labor on the cane fields. But what was happening with India is that British rule was penetrating into the rural areas. New taxes were coming into being. The whole social relations was being overturned, and people were losing access to the land. They were basically starving. Famine often was stalking India. And so many of these people were pushed into seeking another life. And that is one of the main reasons for people jumping on a ship, not really knowing where they were going, what could they expect. So that was one reason. The second reason is sometimes people were enticed by what they called Akatias, who were really recruiters, who promised them gold and diamonds and a life of splendor. And many of them thought, okay, we could serve these 5 years or 10 years and we'll arrive back in this village as heroes.
And the next question, Prof, will be maintaining the religious and cultural practices. How difficult was it for them under those restrictions?
One of the first things that the British did when you indentured was to put a number on your chest. They didn't refer to people with their names. They felt that these people were cogs in a laboring machine. They had no culture, no history, and no future. They didn't care about their future after the 5 or the 10 years of indenture. The response of the indentured was quite incredible. They were creative. Wherever they went to a plantation, they will build a place of worship, rudimentary. Wherever they went to a plantation, they would use the plantation to try and build a sense of brotherhood and sisterhood with each other, share whatever little they had, and then they turned these places like temples into little rudimentary schools so their children could read and write. So as much as the system of indenture was meant to dehumanize, they were insisting through their culture, through their telling of the stories like the Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita, to humanize themselves and have a link that they are people who won't simply be numbers, but people who had a future.
And one last question, Prof. In your research, are there any voices or pieces of history that were omitted or erased in the history of indentured Indians in South Africa?
Well, one of the things that, everybody loves to write a history that makes them feel good, that puts them in the best light. And often what is not really included in these histories is that many women arrived alone. And it is such an incredible story that they would leave a village. They would then come to a depot. From the depot, leave to come to Port Natal. From the Port Natal, walk to a plantation. For every 6 or 5 men, there'd be 1 woman. They'd face harassment. They would often be on half the diet of men. They would work from sunrise to sunset. Yet they built lives, and they created families, and they gave hope to a new generation. So these were the first women liberation fighters in many senses. And often the history books, even the most history books, tend to render invisible the stories of single women making a life in Africa. But I always say to people that this is an epic African story, and single women are central to that story.
Thank you very much for your time, Prof. Much
Thank you.
appreciated.